YouTube. Hello, YouTube. Welcome to the discussion about boundaries. Let's go ahead and get started with this video.
If you know that you struggle with setting boundaries, then this talk today is for you. If you think you might struggle with setting boundaries, then this talk today is for you. Because if you're starting to ask questions about boundaries and starting to wonder if you have some issues with boundaries in your life, then chances are you do, or you wouldn't be asking those questions. So this video, this talk today is for you, and it's going to clear a lot of things up for you. We're just going to do some foundational work with boundaries. I do talk a lot about boundaries, mostly, well, for two reasons. One of them is because of me seeing myself and my life before understanding what a boundary was, and then after doing my own work to really establish and create and maintain strong and healthy boundaries. And then also seeing my clients and students when their world is opened up to boundaries, seeing their lives and their well-being and their relationships with both others and themselves completely transform. So that's why I drink the boundaries Kool-Aid. That's why I'm offering it up for anyone else who wants some of it.
So one of the things I kind of believe is that boundaries are expressions of love, self-love, and love and respect for others, right? If we know our own boundaries and we don't allow people to cross those, I don't know, it's kind of a better life. You end up with the people who push the boundaries, push the envelope all the time. They leave your life because, they don't want to deal with that. They don't believe in that. They don't even understand boundaries at all.
But we are going to do some foundational work today. For those of you who are more seasoned in your boundaries, you've been doing boundaries work for a while, this is going to be a great refresher. For those of you brand new, this is going to be key foundational work to get you going to be able to establish, maintain, and feel good about healthy boundaries in your life. If you're new here, welcome to our incredible little corner on the internet. Take a second, introduce yourself in the comment section below. If you're back again, it's always good to have you. Either way, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. The buttons.
By the way, I recommend that everyone go check these people out online. Julia, Christina, anyone that I show, I recommend that everybody check out the video. As a matter of fact, I'm going to post it in the chat and pin it so that it's there. And for folks watching on YouTube, it'll be in the description box so that you can... Well, we don't need that up there. But anyway, I'll fix that. Yeah.
Right down there. Either way, my name is Julia Christina, and I am a registered clinical therapist, a researcher, a coach, and the creator of my incredible membership community called the Shift Society, full of shifters taking this work that we talk about here to a deeper level and being supported and encouraged and just being surrounded with a community the whole way through as we are doing this work. You can get more information about the Shift Society in the description below. I help heart-centered humans break through the crap that is holding them back so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And not having clear and healthy boundaries in your life can really hold you back. Mm-hmm. If you often struggle with feeling overly stressed and overwhelmed and stuck and trapped and resentful and taken advantage of.
Right, because if you're not people don't respect your boundaries, if you're not vocal about them, people are just going to walk right over you, and you're going to constantly find yourself back in these situations that you didn't want to be in. You're like, oh, damn, here I am again. Oh, it's because I'm not enforcing my boundaries.
And if you don't really know who you are and don't feel solid and secure in who you are, and notice yourself fusing your identity into other people, then chances are there is a boundary issue. that you've never learned how to understand, how to create, and how to set and keep your own clear and healthy boundaries. And so we are going to start changing that today by giving you the foundational steps to having boundaries, having better boundaries, more clear and healthy boundaries in your life. Before we get into this, I just want to remind you, in case you're new to the boundary stuff, I have talked about this before on my channel, but if you're new to it, just to note that contrary to a lot of the teaching out there, boundaries are not about forcing anybody else to change. They are not about control.
That's huge, and that's what I always say. Like, I would say maybe in the manosphere, there's discussion about, boundaries and how it's being used against men or whatever, and they talk about their boundaries, and it's like, they don't want their partner to wear skirts or makeup or high heels or something, so they don't want them to have male friends or whatever. And it's more about saying, okay, if I don't want this in a partner, right, either I can say, hey, this is not okay with me, and they can say, okay, I'm cool with that, or they can say, no, this is something that's very important to me, at which point the right thing to do would say, okay, if this is unacceptable for me, then I have to step away, not punish or force the partner or force the relationship.
Controlling anyone else. They're not about saying, you need to be this way in order for me to be okay. What they are is what happens after we make a request for change. So we find that someone is acting in a way or saying things or doing things that we don't like. And so we are requesting a change for them, of them. And then if they decide not to change, then it's up to us to decide what we need to do to take care of ourselves. So the analogy of understanding boundaries as here's your yard, here's your lovely little house on a tree-lined street, and you've got this kind of front yard area with a white picket fence surrounding it, and people are welcome to come into your yard, right? It's not like a stone wall that says keep out, nobody enter. People are allowed to come in, but you do have some rules with how you would like them to treat your property and treat your belongings if they're in there. So
I recently had this experience twice with having established boundaries up front, and then having to ask people to leave my house. I had two people come stay at separate times, and just in a short matter of time, they were constantly pushing up against and violating my boundaries that I had set. Very simple ones, again, mostly to do with like physical space, some to kind of do with their own independence and how I value my own independence. And they couldn't respect them, and so I had to ask them to leave. And there's no ill will there. I hope that I don't know, hope that they're okay, but yeah, I couldn't have that. Couldn't have it. And again, I asked them multiple times, and they continued to push on that.
If they take your hose and use their hose, you would like them to wind it up and put it away when they're done. If their dog comes in and craps on your lawn, you would like them to pick up the poop and take it away with them. So these are going to be your rules for your property, and no one gets to tell you sort of what boundaries you should have or shouldn't have, and what are the right boundaries and what are the wrong boundaries. It's going to depend on the person. Someone might be totally fine with the neighbor coming and using their hose and then just leaving it all askew all over the yard. Somebody might be totally fine with that and be like, oh, they were probably busy. It's no big deal. I'm more than happy to wind it up. And it's not going to be an issue for you. The important thing is that you decide what your rules are. And so it's not saying to the other person, you have to do this. If you don't do this, then I'm going to kick and I'm going to scream and I'm going to yell. No, I'm going to say, if you would like to use my hose, this is how I'd like you to treat it. I'd like you to wind it up. And if you are not willing to do that, then that's fine. I mean, you can do whatever you want. Like, you can have whatever ideas about how to treat someone else's hose that you want to. You just won't be given permission to use my hose, right? So these are the rules. If you want to come into my space, if you want to use my stuff, then this is what I ask. And if you don't want to do that, then my stuff is not available for you. And if you really come in and make a mess of things and don't respect any of the rules, then I'm going to ask you not to come onto my property. You can go and exist however you want to exist. I'm not trying to control you, but you can just exist in someone else's space or in your own space like that, but not in my space. Capiche? So that's it. That's what generally, when we're talking about boundaries, that's just sort of an overview of what it looks like. What's okay with me, what's not okay with me. You can do whatever you want, but if you want to be in my space, this is what it looks like.
Yep.
So getting clear on that. So many people run into problems with boundaries when they think that they are using a boundary to change someone else.
Right. That's not our goal.
And you know how well that works because you
can only control and change yourself. And that's something I really tried to teach to my kids, and I hope they got it. You know, you can only hope and do what you can, and then find out in the future if they tell you or you see it. But yeah, you can't control anyone else, and you shouldn't try to. Just like you want to be, they want to be too. And if it conflicts, then it's just best to go separate ways. And so many people want to force that, and maybe more people forced that in the past. And, you know, I don't know, it's no point in it. Like, happiness and is so much more important. Happiness and safety.
It. And generally, other people don't really want to be told what they have to do or not have to do, right? Just like us, we don't like to be told what we have to do or not have to do. And so when that happens, when we start to feel controlled, we end up resisting, we end up getting annoyed, we end up maybe even rebelling and doing more of the thing. Again, that does depend on the relationship and on the person. If someone is coming to you and saying, you have to do this or else, versus like, hey, when you do this, it really bothers me, I don't like it, I'm going to ask you to stop doing it, or could you be more mindful of this, or make an effort to not do it when I'm around, or whatever that is. So you can make a request, and hopefully there is a certain level of reciprocity and respect in those close relationships where people will be willing to respect that request. But the boundary comes in if they are not willing to do that. So if you need to continue doing this thing, if you need to continue to yell at me or criticize my life choices or stop by with unannounced, then this is what I will do. This is what I need to do.
Yeah, so yeah, I definitely don't like people stopping by, but when it came to family, I had the opposite problem. You know, we lived 10, 15 minutes away from my parents, and like, you know, 30 minutes from my in-laws, and they never came to see us. I don't think my kid spent the night with my mom until he was like 5. So yeah, I have the opposite problem of people just stopping by. But yeah, here we go.
To manage myself in this situation. So, an example, if you yell at me, you can yell. I'm not going to try and control you, but if you yell at me, I will walk out of the room. And if you follow me to the other room, I will leave the house and go on a walk until you are, willing to have a civil conversation in a moderate tone or whatever that is. So you can keep yelling. I'm just not available to stick around for it. Another example. If it's a family member or a friend or whoever who, when you are with them, they like to comment on your weight, your life choices, your relationship status, that's their prerogative. They might think those are perfectly reasonable things to talk about. You may not. You may not want to. You may not like that. And so that's okay. right? They might think it's okay. You don't think it's okay. But if they want to play in your yard, they have to follow your rules. But they don't have to follow your rules. It just means that then they can't play in your yard. So
Yeah, you
if
can't play
someone
in my
brings up
yard no more. Get
topics
out.
that you are not interested in talking about, then you simply don't engage in the conversation. And you can let them know, you can say, hey, I'm not interested in talking about my weight, my life choices, or my relationship status, or whatever the topic is. If you would like to talk about that, I am not going to engage in the conversation. I'm not going to answer questions about it. I'm not going to talk.
I bet this is something a lot of people really, oh, I know it is, face at holidays, birthdays, where family gets together. Like, there's always somebody in the family who's just kind of dumping on everybody. And, I guess the same is true around political talks. Like, your ultra conservative family members drown you out, or, or the liberal family members, who knows. But yeah, those are boundaries. Like, I'm a highly politically charged person, and I just don't talk about it at family events. There's no point. My stepdad, I can kind of talk with about stuff like that. I can tell him I'm like a communist, but most other people, it's not even worth the time. Yeah, so like that's a boundary I set for myself. Like, I'm not going to talk about it. Another boundary I have is not arguing with people online. Like, there's an urge there sometimes, and sometimes I get triggered and do it, but mostly, like, these are boundaries I'm setting for myself.
About it, I'm just not going to do it. Your choice, my choice. Your choice to bring up the topic, my choice to not participate in the conversation. If you have children, and if you're around someone, a family member or whoever, when they are with your children, they call your children down, they criticize your children, they, treat your children in a way that is not okay with you, then those are your children. It is your prerogative to say, hey, whatever you think is an okay way to talk to a child, I don't agree. So if you are going to continue to talk to them like that, I will not bring my children around you. That's it. Simple as that. And then another example that comes up surprisingly frequently with both my clients, and it's come up a few times in the Shift Society as well, is having people that stop by your house unannounced. Some of you really do not like this, and you don't know what to do about it. Some of you are completely fine with it, and you're like, that's great. You might even really like having people stop by, pop in for a cup of coffee and a little chat or whatever that is. But some of you do not like it, and you don't know what to do about it, especially if it's like a close family member, like a mother or a mother-in-law who maybe even has great intentions of stopping by to bring you something, or to just drop something off, or just wants to come for a visit to maybe see the kids or whatever that is. There's great intentions, but you don't like it. So you feel really stuck because you don't want to hurt their feelings. You don't want to upset them, but you also really don't like it. So again, being able to make the request and being able to say, hey, I don't love it when people stop by. I really love seeing you and I want to spend time with you, but could you please call first? Could we set up a time? Because I find it really kind of jarring and challenging for me. It's a me issue. I, find it hard to do things that are not planned and to have people come over without anticipating it or planning or preparing for it. So just being able to say that. And if this person doesn't like that boundary, continues to do it, even though you've requested them not to do it, then just being able to say, hey, I've asked you a few times to not do this. So what's going to happen is if you do stop by unannounced, I'm not going to answer the door.
Boom. I'm not going to answer the door. Like, that would probably drive me nuts. I don't think I could sit here looking at my front door while somebody's knocking on it after I've told them not to randomly show up 50 times. Yeah. Wild.
If you would like to call first, set up a time, make a plan, absolutely. but I won't answer the door. So you can stop by, you can, continue to do what you're doing. This is about me controlling your behavior, because I can't, obviously. This is what I will do if you continue to do this. So giving you more clarity about what a boundary is. It's about...
Oh, and you know what? If that's like an ex, like constantly dropping by, you know, not calling ahead, not texting, not saying, hey, I want to come see the kids, right? Or take them out for like to McDonald's or whatever, like take them out for a couple of hours. I want to come see the kids, whatever. Just knock, knock, here I am. Like, that's where it's really, important to establish those boundaries. And if they keep violating that, well, you know what you can do.
saying, if you do this, then I will do this. Your choice, my choice. So now when it comes to setting and establishing and keeping our boundaries, I'm going to give you 3 steps for that. And the first one is to get really clear on your boundaries. And the reason this is important, because if you want to really set your boundaries and keep your boundaries, you have to like your reasons for your boundaries. It's going to make it a lot easier. I mean, you can just sort of make up a boundary on the whim and set it, but if there is any pushback, if you're not feeling sort of solid and secure and you haven't really spent the time really coming up with your reasons why you like the boundary, why you are okay with setting the boundary, why you believe that this is the right boundary for you, then if there's pushback, you're more likely to kind of be sort of wishy-washy about it and be like, okay, I guess I shouldn't set this boundary, and I guess...
Yeah, that's kind of how it was when I was younger, or maybe in young adulthood, right? I kind of understood that I had these boundaries, but they weren't really firm or clear, and so I pushed them, or I let people push on them. It's only really been like the past year and a half that I've really kind of learned about and started practicing and putting in place firm boundaries to protect my peace and my stability.
If you don't like it, then I shouldn't be doing it, right? And then we're more likely to kind of cave and not keep the boundary. That's okay if you really are okay with changing your boundary, but it's not okay if you're getting talked into something that you really don't want to and then end up feeling resentful or bitter or angry or even more stressed or more overwhelmed, right? If you have said no and someone convinces you to say yes, and you don't actually want to say yes, but you don't really have a reason that you believe to be a good enough reason to stick with your no, then you're going to be more...
The only reason anyone needs to stick with their no, right, is the fact that they're saying it. No means no. No means no. It's another thing I've drilled into my kids' head. I've got 3 boys, and so that was a big thing. Like, no means no. Personal space. No means no. Personal space. No means no.
Likely to cave and go to the yes, even though it's not a genuine yes. Yes? Okay. So spending the time to come up with your reasons for your boundary and like your reasons. Feel solid in those reasons. It's going to make it so much easier to set the boundary and keep the boundary. And then at an even deeper level, you not only have to just like your boundary, you have to believe that you are worthy of having boundaries. That it's a...
And you are. I'm here to tell you, you are. You are somebody. You are someone. And last week I talked about reparenting your inner child, right? This hurt little wounded child maybe that you're carrying around with you. And I forgot where I was going with that. It happens. It happens.
You're allowed to have a space with your own rules, even if other people don't agree with them or like them or want to follow them. Because I'm going to tell you right now, there is going to be pushback, especially if you've been doing things a certain way for people for a long time, and all of a sudden you start changing it, you're messing with the system. They are going to feel that change. It's going to disrupt something in them. They're not going to like it, and so they are likely going to push back on the boundary. And if you don't believe that you're actually worthy of having and keeping boundaries, that your well-being, that your sanity, that your sense of self, that your limits is worth respecting, worth you respecting, they don't have to believe it's worth respecting. That's up to them. You can't control their thoughts. But what you can do is manage your own and get clear on your own. So you have to get clear on your reasons and have to believe that you deserve to have those reasons. This goes deep. This is why boundary setting is so much more about learning how to say no. It's about believing that it's okay for you to say no.
And I don't know about you guys, but I was not raised in a household where saying no was something that you could do to an adult. And I didn't know how to say no. Like the first person I knew, a friend of mine who knew how to say no, I was like, what? First time he was like, no, I'm not doing that. I was like, what? You know. But I've learned how to say no. Took a long time, but I learned. And it's because, I finally found, I know what I was going to say about the inner child work is becoming enough for myself, right? I don't need others to know my worth. Right. So if somebody's like looking at this saying, oh, you suck at this. Well, you know what? I like me enough that I'm going to keep doing it until I feel called to do something else. And, just the fact of me sitting here, I was so nervous before this started. So nervous. But I have goals. And this and doing therapy is what I want to do. So this is important to me, and I'm going to stick with it.
Anyone can say no, but you're not doing it because there's something inside of you, there's a belief inside of you that it's not okay, that you're not worthy of it, that someone else's preference about how you spend your time and energy is more important than your own preference about how you spend your time and energy. So getting that clarity. So then the next step 2, is to actually implement the boundary. Now, there are 2 ways that you can do this. You can overtly say the boundary. If you do this, I will do this. Please stop doing this. And if you continue, then I will do this or whatever.
And that's kind of a technique. I've taken a class called Fair Fighting. And it's for like couples, spouses, partners. And it's especially when couples have these struggles, right? It's important to begin, or you're taught to begin to, when you go into a discussion, say, all right, if this gets heated, if I get angry, because I'm a person who gets heated, right? One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to need to go for a walk. 5, 10, 30 minutes, I don't know, but a walk. Right, I need to clear my head. And then, right, so this kind of goes hand in hand with boundaries, right? You establish these things up front. And so this is doing that's probably more important for really close relationships like partners and family and friends. I don't really know, but it depends
You can
on you.
Very overtly, clearly spell it out. You can also clearly communicate a boundary non-verbally. So let's say there's someone in your life who likes to have really heated, intense, kind of provocative conversations about sort of controversial topics. And you know that engaging with this person in conversations like this doesn't usually go anywhere good. It's not helpful. It's not useful. It's not how you want to use your energy. It's just not what
that exact reason is why I set that boundary for myself, because I found so many times that it was pointless. And I fail. I fail from time to time. Um, but yeah, that's an important one for me.
You want to do. And so if the person starts kind of trying to draw you into the conversation, you can simply not. You can change the subject. You can, give really what I call is the limp handshake response. When you give someone a handshake and they give you kind of like a limp hand, you're like,
Nice to
ugh,
meet you.
that felt kind of icky. Like they're not really giving you anything. And so you kind of pull away. Same thing in a conversation. If someone is like, oh, can you believe that this happened with this government or whatever that is? And they're like, what do you like? That's just wild. Who does stuff like that? And you're like, I don't know. That's interesting. And just giving them the limp handshake. Like you're not really giving them anything. And it's just communicating that you're not willing to engage, keeping your responses sort of very short and on the surface, and just not drawing into that.
Which actually sounds a lot like the the gray rock technique, which is where, when that person is like going into their politically charged conversation, that you just go, right? You're just not bothered. You're not even worried. And I learned the other day about a technique called yellow rocking, which is where you bring a bit more positive response, but it's still just very short and to the point, disinterested, but just upbeat and cheerful. So I recommend you do some research if you're like in stressful environments that you can't really get out of, and situations like that are happening. It's a pretty good technique for getting through things and also being aware of yourself.
That is going to communicate pretty clearly to the person that you are not interested in having the conversation. Now, they might try a few times to draw you in. They might be like, oh, well, maybe that didn't work. Maybe I'll try something else. And they might try to draw you in another way, and just you kind of continuing to not let yourself be drawn into it if that's not a conversation you want to be drawn into. You can state things more directly. You can say to someone, hey, in this conversation, you are getting aggressive and you are being critical, and I don't like the way that you are talking. And so I am going to leave the conversation, and I will come back if and when you are willing to engage me in a respectful way. And if you are not willing to do that, that's completely your choice. I'm just not willing to engage in a conversation.
Right.
So you can say it more directly like that, or you can communicate it in a direct but non-verbal way. And you may need to play with that a little bit. And some people will pick up on the nonverbal stuff and some people may not. And so then you may need to, if someone keeps trying, you may have to say with the conversation example, hey, I'm not willing to discuss this topic, but I am willing to discuss this topic. So you might say, I'm not willing to talk about politics, but I am willing to talk about sports. Or,
I'm not willing to talk about sports. Please. No, thank you.
I am willing to talk about how your job is going and what's going on in your life. So that's clearly spelling it out if the person is not getting the nonverbal cues. Then, and this is...
And so many people don't get the damn nonverbal cues. Like I said, I have this thing with personal space. Like, I want you to be like at least one arm's length away. And if you have a longer reach than me, like, yeah, it should be your arm's length, not mine. And like my nonverbal cue is, after I've expressed it, is like when they go to lean in, like they always do, like the space violators do, I just step back. Sometimes they get it, but a lot of times they don't. If they're intoxicated, there ain't no chance that they're getting it, so I don't necessarily... Yeah, I still do that.
Probably the most important. Actually, they're all important, but this is where people get tripped up the most. The third step with boundaries, and it's so simple, but it seems to be the biggest problem for people, is actually keeping the boundary. So often it happens that you muster up the courage to state your boundary, and you finally say it, you finally choke out the words, and you're so proud of yourself for doing it. But then the person gives some resistance. Well, I don't like that. Well, that's kind of dumb. Well, you should do this anyways. And then you crumble like a house of cards. Is that the right analogy? The house of cards crumble? You know what I mean. But you fold. Oh yeah, you fold like a house of cards. Is that it? Anyways. But you just give in. And that's normal. And know that that's normal, because it can be really scary. It can feel really weird. And
oh, that's another thing. I used to be like that's the wrong spelling, or that's not how you pronounce that, or blah, blah, blah. I don't care anymore, to be quite honest. In fact, you'll notice, my title is in lowercase letters, except for like stuff for school. Yeah, I'm typing in lowercase letters, no apostrophes, very little punctuation, because I don't care anymore. It doesn't bother me. If I get your point, I get your point. If I don't, I can ask for clarity, and not be rude about why I didn't understand.
And to start setting boundaries when you haven't before, but working to keep solid in that. And this is why you have to like your reasons for it, and you have to believe that you deserve to have those reasons for your boundaries, because that's going to help you resist the folding. Because what happens when we say no and there's pushback and then we change that to a yes, it just communicates the message to somebody else that all they need to do is push back, and then you will give them what they want, or do what they want, or change your no to a yes. And you don't really mean it. What is actually communicating is you don't really mean it. And then they don't actually believe you. Your boundaries are not believable because you're not keeping them. And this just goes back to basic behavioral psychology. So if you give a reward, and then you...
Right, what's that, some Pavlovian conditioning, right? Given the reward. I know there's other experiments too, but... yeah, maybe it's not Pavlovian, but whatever.
Stop giving the reward and continue to stop giving the reward, right? You continue I can't remember what animal they use. It was like the mouse or whatever, pushes the lever. And every time they push the lever, the little pellet comes out. And then all of a sudden they start pushing the lever and the pellet doesn't come out. They're going to keep pushing it for a while. And if no pellet comes out after them pushing it for a little while, they're just going to stop pushing it.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're like, this isn't available. No matter how many times I push, it's not coming. So I'm going to save my energy and focus it somewhere else. I'm going to stop doing this behavior because it's not getting me what I want. However, what they found is the most effective way to prevent a behavior from changing is something called intermittent reinforcement. So if every time the mouse pushes the little lever and the little treat comes out, and then all of a sudden it stops, and then they push a few more times, and then a treat comes out, then they're going to keep pushing, and they will actually push for a very long time because they believe that the treat will eventually come out. They just have to keep pushing. If the treat comes out after a few times of it not coming out, that is a very solid way of reinforcing a behavior that you actually want to change.
I think that's really a great analogy of it. Especially when you have people who push up on your boundaries. Like, just poke and poke and poke. It's really easy to just give in, especially, again, depending on how you grew up. If boundaries were a thing. They did not exist in my family. Not that I'm aware. Except Hey, Sarsha. Welcome. Welcome. We are talking about boundaries. Um, how are you? How are you? Yeah. So anyway, so basically, we're kind of at step three here of learning about our boundaries, but uh, we are just saying like right now she's talking about how um, like in treat like experiments with mice or monkeys or whatever, they press the button, they get the treat. And so if you're not firm in your boundaries, right, you might have them up. They've always gotten that treat. Now you've put them up so they hit the thing 3 or 4 times, and then a treat comes out. You're reinforcing it, right? And then they're like, oh, okay, so I can. Bop, 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 bop. Oh, it's not gonna happen the first time, so bop, 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 and then it happens again. So she's just saying like you got to stick to your guns.
So if you say no, and even if you say no a couple times, and then all of a sudden
I'm doing good.
someone
Thank you.
keeps pushing and you end up changing and saying
I'm gonna slide
yes,
this over here so I can see it.
it doesn't sink in that like, oh, I pushed this person to say yes, so I should probably not do that. What they think is, oh, I pushed this person to say yes and it worked, so next time I just have to keep pushing to get them to say yes, to get them to just chuck their boundary out the window. And so it's
Oh, and so one of the boundary scenarios that she came up with, or she discussed, was maybe like people stopping by unannounced. You really don't like that, but people always do it, whether it be family, friends, random acquaintances. They're just like, oh, hey, I'm here. And so like one of the boundaries, if you're really trying to enforce it, is, say, hey, you can keep coming by because I can't control what you do, but if you do, I'm going to stop answering the door, right? Like, woo, wouldn't that be rough? That's what I said. I said, I don't know how long I could sit here while somebody was knocking at my door. Uh, but, I haven't said the word yet, but a lot of this is kind of going into, narcissistic relationships. Right? It really, that's where boundaries are like the most important. And then, um, that's where they're the most necessary. It's where like they make the most difference. And so I think that's kind of where we're gonna go next. Is kind of some discussion about this around narcissism.
going to make it even harder on you to stick with the boundary, to get the person to respect your boundary if you are not consistent with the boundary. You might think that, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't keep this boundary, maybe I should just give in, and then you do. And you might think that you're doing a good thing or you're being a good person or a nice person or whatever that is. But if you have already established that you want this boundary, that you like your reasons for this boundary, you believe it's okay for you to have this boundary, then you've already done that work. You don't need to give in. You don't need to change it because you've already done the work to establish that reason for that boundary. And so let yourself stick with it, or else you are making things more confusing for the other person. You're making things more difficult for yourself. And it is going to make it so it's going to be even harder to have them respect the boundary because they haven't been respecting the boundary because you haven't been respecting the boundary. See how that works? So this is why it is really important to stick with your boundaries and why it's so important to like your reasons for your boundaries. So if boundaries is something that you really struggle with and you don't know where to start, then I have a free download for you.
So, I'm gonna stop the ethical react right there. Um, yeah, and like what I learned around my divorce and this growth that I've experienced is that boundaries are important, number one, and uh, you know, sometimes being kicked out of somebody's life, that's them putting up a major boundary, and you kind of have to just some people don't. Some people don't let that shit go. But me, I was like, okay, got it. And accepted it and said, okay, I can do better with myself than I've done before. So let's see. Yeah, so let's do this one. Just
Hi everyone, it's Dr.
This is Dr. Romani. I really like her. When I kind of started on my healing journey, you know, a lot of behaviors I had engaged in from my wounded self was put on display. You know, it was being talked about here, and it was really hard to watch. But by that point, I knew it was like you have to change. You cannot be the way you were. All right, cool. Do your thing.
Romani, and welcome back to this YouTube channel on all things related to narcissism and narcissistic and difficult relationships. Today, once again, we're going to take on the issue of boundaries, but we're going to be taking it on from a different approach. We're really going to take on the issue of why boundaries are so hard to set in narcissistic relationships. So, before we get to that, please come on over and subscribe to this channel. And then hit that bell to get notifications every time we put out new videos, which is several times a week. So let's break this down. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm always making this suggestion to you, but I'm aware that it's not so easy. So why are boundaries so hard to set, especially for people who are in any kind of narcissistic relationship? I know
Just so we can get her name
that
there
some
on
of
the
you
video.
hear this guidance, or many of you hear this
Put this
guidance,
up
not
top.
just from me, but from everybody who talks about toxic relationships, that one of the most important tools in managing narcissists is boundaries. Honestly, it's one of the most important tools in life. But if you can master that, then you got your narcissist all figured out. So if it's so simple, then why is it so difficult? There are two simple reasons that boundaries are so hard to set. And interestingly, they are also part of the reason you got stuck in a relationship with a narcissist in the first place and why you remain stuck in it for a very long time. What are these two reasons? Number one,
Let's go.
you are worried about other people's reactions and what other people will think if you set a boundary. Your fear is if you set a boundary, people will not like it. They're going to think that you're not a very...
Yeah, that was, again, you know, not knowing how to do it, combined with not wanting to let people down, you know, feeling this pressure or whatever, right, becomes impossible.
nice person. Even the people in your life who are not narcissistic. Let's view it simply. In the most simple version of a boundary, what is it? It's about saying no. It's about not giving in. It's about not giving up too much, not agreeing to something you cannot do, not agreeing to something that makes you uncomfortable, not overextending. Think of the last time, really, think about the last time you set a boundary. Share it in the comments if you want. What was that boundary about? I know for me that the most recent boundary I had to set was a few days ago, and I had to say no to something. It was very uncomfortable. And I know I let someone down. But on that day, I happened to be exhausted, and I knew I was kind of burned out. And the person asking me of this thing I needed to do was incredibly entitled. Did I sit with this discomfort for a few minutes? Yeah. And after about 30 minutes, that discomfort left. I was relieved, and I had a better day as a result. But in my case, it was easier because there was no one else who knew I was setting the boundary. When there's other people involved, it's really hard. The other issue is not just feeling like you're letting down one person, but again, it's that bigger idea of how will other people view you. There's often the concern that other people will either view you as lazy, or as a flake, or as not a team player, or just that anxious feeling that people are not going to like me because I set a boundary. That concern that you will be judged harshly is why so many people keep giving in to doing too much usually for the toxic people who just keep asking for more. There is an ancient quote by Lao Tzu who said, "Care what other people think, and you will forever be their prisoner." That quote could not be more true when it comes to setting boundaries. We are never fully going to live in a world where we never care about what other people think. But we tend to put too much importance on that when it comes to boundary setting, and then we don't end up setting the boundaries. And finally, because so many people out there feel like they are not enough, they just keep doing and doing and doing for other
Right.
people, thinking that there's a point they could reach where they'll feel like they're enough. They can fix that.
Right.
It's never enough for other
No.
people, especially for narcissistic people. So feeling like you're not enough, that's on you to address. Doing stuff
Yes.
for other people,
Yes, and that I mean I spent my whole life not feeling like I was enough, right? I was never enough. I was weak, a coward. This is all to myself, for most of my life. Scared. Yeah, and I had to address it. I had to become enough. And it wasn't necessarily easy, and it took like me getting to the lowest point of my life, lowest point ever. But I was able to do it. And it'll probably be a work in progress for the rest of my life.
ain't gonna address that. The big issue here is that these very qualities in ourselves are caring too much about what other people think, being afraid of letting other people down, feeling like you have to keep rescuing or doing stuff for other people, feeling like you're not enough, not liking the feeling of letting other people down, is literally exactly part of what made you so vulnerable to a narcissistic relationship and perhaps found it so hard to get out, or maybe you're still in it. Toxic people take and take and take. They don't have the empathy to care. They're deeply entitled. So they're never going to stop and take stock and wonder if they are asking too much of someone. In fact, it's
I can definitely say that in my last relationship, for sure, that I took and took and took and tried to give back, but I don't know. I was not really attracted to my ex, and I knew that very early on. I really liked her and grew to love her and do love her still, in many ways. But, I ignored my own internal voice. And again, that was almost, that was like a boundary that I had that I didn't know how to enforce. Right? Was that I wouldn't just settle for someone to be in a relationship. And I think that's what I did. And I think that's a major reason why we failed. Because as good as we were from time to time, we lacked a certain level of compatibility. And so, I mean, I don't even know if that counts as me taking so much as like suppressing my own intuition and knowledge of myself and staying somewhere that I didn't fully want to be. I wanted to be there, but not fully.
more likely that they simply view you as a convenience, an object to fulfill their needs. So they aren't going to wonder if they are asking too much of you. And if you care what they think and never set a boundary, then you will be living life as a bottomless
No, I
well
wasn't.
that
I was not
keeps
doing
serving.
what would be best for everyone, And, oh yeah, like you stayed in a relationship that you knew pretty quickly that it wasn't good. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat, not you. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. And that's really hard too, right? To know because on some levels, if you stay with someone for that long, you like them on some level. But yeah, um, yeah, yeah. Yes, indeed. Like sometimes and right, and that's why I'm here. That's like, I've jumped around from topics. They're all connected, and I will recycle so many of these topics. But I mean, it all comes down to like just respecting and loving yourself, and just, uh, but yes, you needed to also care about what you wanted, right? And I mean, it comes with age. Some of us, especially if we didn't have great childhoods, like I was saying earlier, I don't know if you heard, um, no was not something that I was allowed to say in my house per se. And, further, it was like I wasn't taught the appropriate use of it. So, right, certainly I couldn't say no to a parent like don't run in the fire. No, like that. But to like I said, I've taught my kids, right? Like no means no. You have a right to say no. They have a right to say no. And when it's said, that's it, right? We don't press. We don't do nothing. We just go okay, and we walk away, or we go about our day or whatever we do. Yeah, yeah. What it sounds like, I mean, at least seems like you're figuring this out, and you're kind of coming to these conclusions, taking these steps to make sure that you're not going right back into something like that, right? It's a long road. It is a long road, and it is. I am always in process myself, so you know, um, just remember to give yourself credit when you do um, successfully respect one of your own boundaries. Yeah.
Their needs. You're the only one who can stop this cycle. That's a boundary. The second thing, what is it? The second thing that makes it so difficult to set boundaries? It's guilt. This relates quite strongly to the first point, but guilt is the idea, and I should say the emotion associated with the feeling that you've done something wrong. And in this case, you've done something wrong by saying no, or that you can't, or you won't do something, or simply you don't want to do something. Guilt about saying no is how people double down on all of this stress. But guilt is one of the strongest glues that keep people in any kind of narcissistic relationship. I feel guilty I didn't visit my mother even though she's always criticizing me. I feel guilty I am not more supportive of my partner. I feel guilty I didn't give my son the ride he asked for. I feel guilty I didn't sign up to do the extra evaluations at work. Guilt is very uncomfortable and we don't like it. So many times it is easier to give in and do the visit to your mom and have the same time wasting conversation with your partner, or give your son the ride, or do the extra work, than to set the boundary and endure the discomfort of the guilt. Many of us were taught from an early age by either watching parents in a dysfunctional marriage or just by how your dysfunctional family system worked, that to not go along to get along meant.
No, right? No, ain't no way. Um, Interestingly enough, during my last marriage, I got into IT, working, trying to go into business with with my father-in-law, her dad, and then later at a hospital. And Dude, I worked so many hours. I would just work, work, work. Like, I mean, I was really genuinely interested in learning and wanting to know everything, but like, I spent so much time away from my family. And I guess it's just proof that I was kind of miserable where I was at. So, but nowadays, no, I'm with you. I'm not signing up for extra evals.
That you were the problem. That setting a boundary was simply not an option. It was highly enmeshed and nobody was setting boundaries. We actually do a terrible job at teaching kids to set boundaries in a healthy manner. Now, obviously, there are some things that they need to do. We all need to do. They need to do their chores. They need to brush their teeth. They need to fulfill their school
Right?
requirements.
Okay, now we're talking about teaching kids, right? They have some things they have to do, but gosh, yes, you gotta teach kids. Like, even before I knew about this stuff really concretely and in the terms that are being used professionally, like, I knew that I did not want to raise my kids in any manner close to the way I was raised. Right? I wanted them to know what no was. I wanted them to have self love. I wanted them to feel supported. Um, you know, I wanted them to feel understood. And I think there was evidence of that throughout their childhood that, well, not just me and my ex, we were successful at kind of doing that.
Their bed. But go beyond that. Sometimes we force kids to play with kids who make them uncomfortable or do extra activities like sports that they don't want to play.
They don't want to do.
Or
You only gotta do
instruments
it, bro.
that they don't want to learn because the parent wants them to play the sport or be friends with their friend's child. The child may not.
That was a huge one during my childhood. My mother did not like my friends at all. She did not, especially as I got older, she did not like the people I chose to be friends with. You know, she wanted me to be friends with like church kids, you know, or just people I didn't really vibe with, you know. And I mean, it just so happened that I chose people who were fun, I thought. You know, we were potheads and, you know, smoked the hell out of some cigarettes and drank from time to time. You know, we had fun. We were the kind of the outcasts in a way, certainly outside of the popular crowd. But that's what I was all about, fun. You know, and this kind of leads into, I'm a vibes and energy based person, and I can tell you that I've made it this far in life by staying away from like low vibing people. Like, once I recognize where their energy's at, I'm like, you know what? I don't need to be here. I'm good. You know, I just walk away. And so that was what was really hard, because a lot of the folks I was friends with were actually decent people, just, you know, caught up in teenage partying.
Want these things. And that child may not feel that he or she can say no. If the child finally finds the courage to say no, they will often face a world of guilt and hurt from a narcissistic parent. After all I do for you, you just won't play soccer or spend time with me or spend the entire weekend with the family, even though, of course, the damn family is scapegoating this child. The child...
And that'll be another thing I talk about eventually, is scapegoats, black sheep. I think I'm a lot of things. Definitely a scapegoat, though, being the oldest, kind of, and the black sheep. Well, and, you know, again, that's another reason why I have this channel, because although I hate this saying, no, I don't hate the saying, okay? So, sometimes, in most cases, our parents did the best they did, and they only emulated and replicated what was shown to them and done to them when they were children, and so on and so forth as we go back in time. And so naturally, it goes to your children. And yeah, like, and that's why I want to do this, because I finally saw it. I finally saw my toxicity, and I saw the good sides of me, and I was willing to process all of these things, and it's like being on the other side of, it's like getting to the peak of the mountain. It took so much, and now you're just on the downhill slope. Like, all right, we're chilling now. And so I want to share that. I want to share that because if I had known so much of this 5, 10, 15 years ago, who knows what I could have avoided. If there were classes, electives, or even mandatory classes in childhood education, dude, it would be so great. It would be so great. And it's also why I'm kind of against patriarchy, because kind of the way it is that men don't want people to have this. Not just women, but they don't want their children to have autonomy. They don't want anyone to. They want to be in control. And so that's why it's even more imperative for me to teach people to maybe try to help people get to where they stand up for themselves.
Doesn't learn boundaries or is guilted for setting them. So you can imagine that
I'm really glad you're here, by the way.
association of guilt and boundary will then stream into adulthood. The reason that learning how to set boundaries, especially with manipulative and narcissistic narcissistic people, I should say, is so difficult, is that you need to learn to get okay with a new kind of discomfort. You need to get okay with possibly not being liked, or maybe being unpopular, or the judgmental scrutiny of other people, or the guilt. Assuming that your boundaries are appropriate, for example, you aren't saying, hey, I'm coming to work, but I'm not going to do what you're paying me to do. Well, obviously, that's not going to fly. But assuming,
no, unfortunately, it's
that
not.
You're setting boundaries
I totally
in
would,
reasonable ways, not taking on extra work you don't have the time for, or going to places where you will be facing criticism or gaslighting, or just not wanting to do something optional because you're exhausted or simply just want to attend to other caregiving duties you have at home, then it's about understanding that setting boundaries sets a tone. The key, and this isn't always possible, especially with parents or siblings or relationships you didn't choose, is to do the boundary setting on the front end. But since most of you watching this are already fully mired in your narcissistic relationships, this becomes about starting to set those boundaries now, today, to start learning to get okay with the discomfort. I got to tell you, you're choosing between two evils, two difficult situations.
Yeah.
But one of them may just be a feeling that you're constructing for yourself, that discomfort. That if I set this boundary, nobody's going to like me. If the people you know or work with or whatever are able to reject you that quickly just for setting a boundary, they really aren't that healthy for you. And in fact, you may be doing the thing that other people are not comfortable doing, which is setting that line. And if they're willing to dump you, well, then they really weren't that in the first place. Boundary setting can also be more difficult if you are not empowered in a given situation.
Yeah.
For example,
when are we not empowered? Let's think childhood. It kind of sounds like you had some of the same stuff back when you were younger, and that lack of empowerment leads to in adulthood. It's like, and I wonder too about my own parents, knowing how it works, knowing that I'm my mom just didn't wake up and decide to treat me this way. My dad didn't just wake up and decide to treat me this way. They learned this somewhere else, and they learned this behavior, and yeah. Gosh, forgiveness. And that's why I say, I will say it plenty on this channel. Forgiveness is not for them. Forgiveness is for you. Like, I forgive my mother for her failures, her shortcomings, her, mistakes. And I forgive my father. I forgive everyone. Fuck it. I don't have to tell them. They don't need to know, although some of them do know. But I did it for me. Did it for me. And then I forgave myself, too, for acting in unhealthy ways because I didn't know things. I forgive me. I forgive me. So anyway, let's keep going. We're almost done with this one.
As a function of race, or the amount of money you have, or gender, or some other status that disempowers you. Boundaries are often a privilege of the privileged.
Oh shit, I didn't.
But
pin
there
these
are
to
a
the
million
chat.
small ways you can still set them,
would.
even if you lack that privilege. Give yourself permission to leave when a conversation becomes taxing, or mentally cut out and go to some happy place in your mind. Use your silence as a boundary. Gray rocking is also a form of boundary. Disengaging is a form of boundary setting. This can be a million small ways that you do this. So I'm well aware when I say, hey, everyone, here's a thought for managing a narcissist.
When I was at the beginning, I said that I would pin the video in the chat, and for the YouTube crowd, I would put the videos in the description. Yeah. So, because I have a mixed crowd right now. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, please let me encourage you. If you've made it this far, thank you. That's amazing, because we're getting pretty close to being done. But I encourage you to come over to Twitch, set up an account. All you have to do is follow me. But yeah, that's where I want to drive my traffic. This is mostly for posterity and for some of those less technologically savvy people and older folks, like the boomers among us, But anyway, I'm going to finish up, and yeah.
Just set a boundary. That may very well set off a whole series of uncomfortable psychological experiences for you. It's not as easy as just saying, no, I'm not going to do that. It's a trade-off. But in the long term, getting comfortable with your own discomfort can end up being far better for your mental health than a lifetime of just giving in to entitled and difficult people. Try it in a small way this week. Try one little boundary and see how it works out for you.
I think that's a perfect idea to try. I don't know, Saoirse, if you have situations where you might, be able to apply a boundary. I have recently done this. Again, I kind of think in terms of like giving energy. I have a pretty strong energy that I give out. And so boundaries that I have, another boundary that I've set recently is not to give all of my energy to situations that aren't reciprocal or completely reciprocal. Or if the reciprocality ends, I have to end my energy giving to that. So that's kind of what I've been practicing lately. Just focusing in all of that energy in on myself. Because I'm in school, I'm doing this once a week right now, which I want to do more often, honestly. I've felt pushed to do it this past Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. So, I don't know. I'm taking my time, doing my thing.
You. Again, it's often baby steps. You may have been not able to set boundaries for a lifetime. Rome wasn't built in a day, and you're not going to build huge boundaries in a week. But you can start somewhere. As someone who just had to set a very uncomfortable boundary in the last 48 hours, I got to tell you, that discomfort, it hits you hard. It hits you right here. All those old voices hit you. But if you give yourself a minute, you'll see that the discomfort doesn't kill you. And then there's a new feeling that floods you, which is relief that, oh my goodness, I feel really relieved that I did not agree to do that thing that's just going to leave me feeling resentful and frustrated. So I hope that helps. Thanks again for tuning in. Welcome to this channel. If you're new to it, please hit that subscribe button and join this magnificent community.
Again, I recommend
and I look forward to seeing you
checking
next
out
time.
Dr.